This is Anirban Saha, and I welcome you on behalf of the team to one new episode of Season 2, where we interview a selected few professionals in the domain of data science and converse about what it takes to get a job in the real world. Today, in conversation, we have Dr. Debmalya Biswas. Dr. Debmalya Biswas is the CTO of Darwin Digital. Till January 2021, he was the AI architect of Philip Morris International. While remaining in the industry, he has written papers and published in really great publications. He grew up and he did his bachelor's in India, his master's in Canada, and Ph.D. in France. He works in Switzerland. In this discussion, we explore a lot of things, from challenges of a researcher in a business setup to understanding how he understands whether a candidate is motivated and what the future holds for natural language processing, computer vision, and predictive analysis. If you like our work, hit the follow button on our LinkedIn page. The link is in the podcast description. Also, do share your feedback with us and listen to our other episodes. Let's get started. Dev Maloda, hello and welcome to this podcast.
Many thanks, Anirban, for the invitation, and looking forward to really a great, interesting conversation. Thanks.
Honestly, I do not exactly know where to start this conversation because there were so many starting points that I had to choose one. And let's start with this. In 2020, you published 6 papers as per Google Scholar, 4 of which you were a single author and the rest as a first author. And this despite being the AI architect of a multinational company. So the first question would be, what keeps you motivated?
I think that's a good question. And if I try to kind of reflect, I think it's difficult because, there's the way the world we live in or we work in, there's a clear distinction between, let's say, academic work where people are publishing all the time and the enterprise world where, where I have been more or less for the last many years, where it's deemed not so essential. Academic work is more considered as kind of, something far into the future, not practical, that cannot be implemented. So I think what we need is, and what I also try to encourage really wherever I get the chance and kind of, the opportunity to influence the stakeholders, is that we need to bridge the gap. So the papers, the presentations were basically kind of, trying to push myself and the team to really kind of share what we are doing, helps in kind of driving it forward. And because it was coming from an enterprise world, it was really kind of things that we worked on, very applied, that can be applied in, the next 2-3 years, even currently. So things that we were doing. So the main motivation was really, I would say, really to bridge this gap that I see, between the academic world where people are maybe, thinking of things which are a few years ahead, and the enterprise world where, we want things which can be applied today, maybe yesterday. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges that needs to be addressed.
And I couldn't help but notice that you were always the first author unless you were the only author. So how is researching in the corporate setup like?
It's very difficult. I mean, here again, I'm assuming that, most of your students, so you haven't been, let's say, exposed to the types of enterprise that exist there. So so let's say we are all in computer science, IT, and things like that. Here, I would really differentiate between, let's say, the Googles and the Microsofts and the Amazons, who are, let's say, the benchmarks, I would say, in terms of driving research in IT, applied research in IT. The second is, let's say, slightly smaller companies who are still building IT products. So their core focus is IT. They are an IT company, but not at the level where they can have a dedicated research lab and things like that. And the third category, and which actually makes the most of the enterprise world, is the non-IT companies. These are companies where you will still find IT, but they are not their job is not to do R&D. Their job is more to take what is available, evaluate what is available, and apply them. And in such companies, so the third kind, it is very difficult to do R&D, because that's not your job expectation, that's not what you're expected to do. And sometimes so you really have to fight that. As companies are getting more digital, even the non-IT focused ones, we shouldn't think of only applying. I mean, what open source has done, what especially in, let's say, AI, computer science, and let's say even blockchain and things like that. More and more things are open source, which have really bridged the gap where you don't need to be a Microsoft earlier with proprietary technologies to do something. Even as a non-IT company, you can do a lot of things. You can be state of the art, but there needs to be a push from your senior management. You need to have that to push it. So I think that's really, it depends, whether you're working for, let's say, a very tech-focused, R&D focused company, or you're working for more, I would say, the non-IT companies who still want to, digitally transform themselves and things like that.
But Debmalya, you talk about senior management, but you are yourself a CTO. Are you not in a position to make changes in the ecosystem in your small ways?
Yes, I mean, but so I have been in a variety of roles, so CTO is, again, I'm kind of, it's a small company. So here, of course, I'm trying to, let's say, we are more IT focused. We are more like an IT consulting company. So here, these things work. So I would say this is more in the second category. But again, I mean, like, without taking any names, let's say Philip Morris and even where I was like Swisscom before, they are not pure IT companies. They are, so telecom, I would say, is slightly close to IT companies, but Philip Morris or FMCG companies or logistics companies, even the pharma companies, even the banks, their core focus is not to do IT R&D. They are more interested in kind of applying, and again, it's very difficult to say without getting controversial, but these companies are not used to doing IT, let's say R&D. IT for a long time for banks, pharma companies, was to keep the infrastructure running, to keep the Wi-Fi running, to keep the printers running. So they are not used to, or let's say the old guard, the senior management is not used to the type of IT that is coming up, who are more self-sufficient, who want to do things, who want to take things forward. So there's a gap. Some companies are doing a better job of adapting to it, but some companies are still kind of, let's say, focused in the old ways of working, and there it is difficult to drive the senior management. So senior management, I really mean the C-level.
Talking about what keeps you motivated, you also are very present in events like Berlin Buzzwords, where people come to listen to you and you share your knowledge. You are invited as speaker in many forums. How do you balance life? On one hand, you're running a company, you're doing your own research, you are also taking part in events actively, you have your personal life as well. So how do you balance it?
Yeah, so I think there are 2 or 3 things here. One, perhaps I'm not the right role model, because some of it means that if you're doing so much multitasking, it means that maybe you are too focused on your work. So again, it depends on what your priorities in life are. Secondly, there's a bit of, a hidden motivation behind doing some of these things, because clearly, well, it was different when I was working for, let's say, a larger company. But now that I'm kind of, let's say we are a kind of IT consulting company here, speaking at conferences, things like that are also seen as some kind of sponsorship. That's how you get business. That's how you present yourself as. So it's kind of basically building a brand around you, So that's how you show that you are really top of the game. This is what you know. So it's kind of showcasing yourself as well. So things like Berlin Buzzwords and things where which are a bit more applied conferences. Here, these are really, sometimes there's a business motive behind it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So sometimes they are encouraged, but it depends. And this is where I also see this. If you go to, let's say, this type of applied conferences, sometimes it's all driven by sponsors. Everyone giving a keynote who is a keynote speaker people. Most people who are a keynote speaker are usually their company sponsoring the event. So you need to choose, many of these events have really become business events. So these conferences, I like Berlin Buzzwords because it was focused on open source. They really didn't take any sponsors. All the speakers, there was no link between who was sponsoring versus who was speaking. So as audience, you really need to choose, because some of them, they're like big conferences, but they are really driven by sponsors. And on the other hand, if you go to conferences which are really research driven, like CVPR, NeurIPS, and things like that, there's no companies. There's either the Googles, Amazons, or the universities. There's no companies like even the small IT companies and things like that. And that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning, the big divide that exists between the R&D focused organizations and the IT companies. So again, to kind of answer your question, there's a bit of self motivation in terms of building a brand, promoting for a company, and of course, in the end, sharing knowledge is always good. Some people take it as a priority, some people do not. But usually the feedback that I have received from conferences that people always, appreciated, at least, who kind of heard. But again, it goes back to whether you are just advertising a product or you're really kind of sharing something that would be useful for someone.
And
sorry, a product can also be useful, but you know what I mean. It's the difference between an advertisement and really sharing with the aim of sharing.
Yeah. I also noticed that your publications cover quite a range of topics. And only very recently you were researching on enterprise search because you were in Philip Morris. Then you moved on to become the CTO and you changed tracks. And when we discussed this in our personal conversation, you mentioned that your idea was not to become an NLP expert. That's very contrary to what we discuss in universities, where we are asked to have an area of interest. We take courses, we do projects, we do thesis, we excel in one area of interest. And you don't seem to follow that. And you have your own rules for that matter. We would love it if you explain it from your perspective, how you see it, and perhaps the T model, which you mentioned.
Sure. I think it also depends, at what stage of your career you are in. So for me, I have a bit of luxury that, I started in databases. So I was working for Oracle as a database consultant. Then I moved to distributed computing, the concurrency, the semaphores and things like that, to privacy focused research at SAP Nokia, where we were, kind of pushing, let's say, privacy enhancing technologies, the homomorphic encryption and things like that you hear today kind of coming back. And to really the more recent let's say past, where I have been working on more NLP and computer vision. Sorry, your question.
I will interrupt you a bit. This is the first time I'm interrupting a guest. You mentioned at which stage of your career you are in, but if you see your pathway, your career, you have always done that. Like you mentioned, you started with databases, then you went to distributed systems, privacy focus, then NLP, and now computer vision.
No, that's a valid question. So let me come to that. So, okay, so about my history. So yes, for me, it has been kind of, that kind of having a broad overview that allows me to kind of, so, I like kind of exploring new technologies. But coming back to the comment that I made and why it is relevant. So I think if you are kind of starting your career in data science, in this, so again, data science, it depends what you mean, because now we are kind of clubbing data science and machine learning together. So computer vision, NLP, and predictive analytics and things like that, I would say, okay, the whole kind of machine learning, what we mean today. If you are starting your career today, or kind of, I think it's good to specialize. Yes, you need to have an overview. There are certain overlapping aspects, and I will again come to it with an example. So again, because I think most of you are kind of NLP based, so let's say transformers is everywhere now. Okay, but let's say you are kind of all related to, let's just say, fields. So taking a concrete example, you see like transformers started as the great big revolution in NLP, but now you see transformers being applied to computer vision. So you have vision transformers and things like that. And this you cannot do unless you have exposure to, let's say, NLP and computer vision. So this is where also the T model comes into practice. So again, if you're starting your career, I would say specialization is good, because there are too many generalists who can give advice, but they cannot do things. So it's good to specialize. But when I meant that at my level, where kind of I was in a position where I was leading a team, and we were, so let's say at Philip Morris, where we were kind of center of excellence, where we were working with the different business units, and we had use cases kind of covering the whole spectrum from, where we needed to apply NLP to where we needed to apply computer vision. So in those cases, I mean, I wasn't, let's say, implementing all of them. I was more acting as a kind of, consultant lead, something, where we need expertise or things like that, I would get involved. But that required that I have a bit more breadth in terms of, having knowledge of different use cases, because at that time it was a bit of business development as well, because you're talking to business stakeholders, trying to see what type of technology can be applied and where. So you need to have a broad exposure to technologies. You need to understand, let's say, up to 50% what most of them can do, but then the real specialization you can only do in one or two things. So that's why I meant, like, depends on what stage of the career you are in, how you are involved in the AI ecosystem. If you are in kind of engineering team, you need to implement things. I would say it's good to specialize. If you are kind of more as a product owner, you're interacting with different teams, you're working for a large company, which requires, let's say, different types of use cases. It's good to have a T-shaped knowledge as well, where you are easily able to, not easily, but able to bridge between different fields, I would say.
One of the questions, which I did not think I'll ask you, but I will right now, because this is one of the questions that I have faced from other students, is at what point would a student know that, okay, this is the point I have specialized enough and I can be recruited into a company, and vice versa, that I have this much knowledge in computer vision and this much in NLP. I have done a couple of projects here and I have done a couple of projects there, and then suddenly I realize that I am not very eligible for any company because they ask for a specialization. So at what point should any student stand up and say, okay, now I am ready?
I think honestly, you are ready when you have prepared a few data science interview tests, so I think you have to see the two things very differently. I wouldn't mix, one is the practicality of getting a job, and the other thing is what you want to do technically. So how you approach about getting a job is really, the way most companies hire, and I'm not a big believer in that. I think I have told you before, is, they have this very long process of, so fundamental questions, then data science questions, then, you go to a whiteboard, kind of do things like that. There are only certain amount of questions that even the interviewers can ask. There are only a certain amount of scenarios that, that they even interviewers can do. So the way to approach this to get a job is really to prepare yourself. I would name them, but, there are so many, let's say, data science, whatever you want to specialize in interview preparations. I'm not saying you even need to pay something. You just need a bit of motivation, and you focus. But then your target is really kind of getting a job. When it comes to really whether I should focus in NLP, computer vision, or whichever field interests you, that is purely up to you. I think there are jobs in everything. Yes, predictive analytics or computer vision may have slightly more jobs than NLP today, but that is changing, hopefully, with transformers, and the more and more you see kind of NLP being used in, let's say, legal and kind of still in more specific industries, but that is picking up. So there, where you should specialize in and up to what extent, that really depends on what is driving you, where you find interest. You can keep on specializing by doing a PhD as well, which kind of is interesting for some people because you are really interested in going into the depth of a problem, going beyond the state of the art. Whereas in some cases, your interest is more like you want to, really take what exists and scale them. So which is what you would more do at an enterprise level. So that is not an easy answer to give. That really depends on what excites you. Sometimes you're more excited by NLP. You feel like a talking chatbot is more interesting than, you can do computer vision, object detection on some things. But I would really decouple the job readiness from what you specialize in. If you specialize in any field, there are jobs. So I wouldn't worry about that.
You also mentioned that you are not a big believer in what is traditionally the recruitment process. So right now you're in a position to take charge. How would you change the recruitment process?
Again, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but I think it's somehow, the reason companies have this 5 rounds of interviews, 7 rounds of interviews is just the supply and demand. It's just that Google gets, 200, 300 applications for every position. They can afford to do it. I don't see that in a way they can cherry pick, yes? So, fundamentally, I don't believe that it kind of, is a good way to filter people or things like that. It's just because there are enough people applying and they have the luxury to do it, you can do it. For me, I think somewhat what is missing is also a bit the attitude. So what I look for when I'm usually hiring myself is, yes, you need good fundamentals, but the way the world is changing today, the way the technologies are changing today, the way, even as a small company or a medium-sized company, you would be working in different things. So what is very important to do or to show is that you have a certain level of motivation and a pedigree to learn new things. That is what I'm usually looking for. Yes, you need certain level of fundamentals. I wouldn't maybe hire someone who has a, history background, who has never touched or let's say programmed anything for a machine learning job. But yes, I wouldn't differentiate between, today you don't know transformers as something to hold you back against, giving you an NLP, let's say, focused job. If I really see that, you have the fundamentals and someone can learn it. So that's my belief, and that's also how I kind of usually do. But yes, there are two thought processes here, I would say.
You talked about transformers and people with programming experiences. What about soft skills? So when you recruit or when you see recruitments happening, how important is a candidate's soft skills?
I think it's, again, something to think about, and to some extent it also depends on, again, I would go back to your career stage, where you are, and maybe what type of company you are going for. So yes, soft skills are important. If you have them, it's great. But let's say even if you don't have them, I think you would fit very well as long as you are kind of, doing as long as your job is more to implement things, execute things, and you are more or less focused on, doing what you have been told. Yes, you still need some, basic team skills. You should be able to talk in a Scrum meeting. You should be able to, talk to your, let's say, neighboring person, let's say, what you are doing, and kind of communicate reasonably. But you do not need the soft skills that we usually mention in the enterprise world, which is really to, influence your stakeholders, influence your managers, influence, let's say, the future of, the future architecture of what you will be doing and things like that. So, but as you grow, and if you are maybe in a non-IT company, then you need more soft skills, because then it's equally important that you are able to, even I would say, at a reasonable level of experience, you are really required to interact with others, with business people who do not talk IT, who do not talk, who talk a different jargon. So again, it depends on the type of company you are working for, the type of, let's say, work that you are doing. You can be a very good researcher, you can have a Ph.D, you can do a very good researcher without any social skills, with talking very little to other people, So If that is the kind of job that excites you and that is what you like to do, that is fine. You can find your niche. But at the same time, if you want to go to, let's say, a more non-IT kind of company, which is like a reasonably big company, because then you will need to align with people. In big companies, usually you need to get everyone on the same board before you are able to push things. So those, you need soft skills. So for those kind of jobs, you will need soft skills. And maybe if your soft skills are, if you have very good soft skills, that's also something that you can kind of, leverage. So there it will help you to progress. So again, this goes back to, let's say, introspecting what you're good at and where you're kind of, what you want to do as well.
You mentioned that your future teammates should have the motivation to learn newer things. How do you judge them? Because to get a job, many people will say that they are very motivated.
Yeah, which doesn't mean a thing. I mean, I have seen, we are human beings, we will lie to get a job, So of course, you don't take everything at face value. But so usually if you're looking for, if you're hiring an experienced person where you have a track record, where the person can easily show that they have changed fields or kind of they have, let's say, tried new things, they have explored new things, you can give examples, it's easier. Even if you are starting, I mean, I think usually what you would look for is that, this is your coursework that you were giving. Maybe you did a project which was outside the coursework, or, you took an initiative and you learned a new thing. So all those are kind of good kind of indicators which tell you that a person is more motivated to keep up to date, to learn things by themselves. And these are very important in, let's say, today's very evolving technology landscape. I mean, it doesn't have to be AI. In any IT field these days, there's kind of, so much happening. You need to have this to succeed. This is not a choice. You need this whether you're working for an IT company or a non-IT company. The soft skills, the other things that we mentioned, the specialization maybe vary to some extent, but the continuous learning, the ability to learn, explore new things, this is needed irrespective of where you are working.
So if I may reconstruct the entire thing, the projects. So from a fresher's perspective, from a fresher's point of view, the projects really matter to a recruiter, especially if you are recruiting. Would master thesis matter?
I think that's kind of usually, again, I don't know what is the structure there, but sometimes these days, the students have an option where you can choose either to do a thesis with a professor with a more academic, let's say, background, and you also have the option of doing it at an industry where, you can work on a more applied problem in a, let's say, more enterprise setting. So again, if you want to do a PhD, definitely the academic way is better. If you want to get a job in the industry, definitely something that you did in the industry, even though, again, I mean, master's thesis, you have to take it with a grain of salt. I have seen, let's say, some projects which are, people are really using the master students to really as, their kind of really their own employees, and they're really working on the project to really, sometimes they have some side problem that nobody has the budget to work on, so you take a student to work on it, which doesn't have so much priority. But still, because you did it in an industry setting and because you kind of you have a feel of how the enterprise works, how the industry works, and you have a certain rhythm culture that you see in an enterprise, that would be preferred when you're trying to get a job in the industry as compared to a purely university driven academic project. So again, think about what you want to do next before how you decide.
Okay. To know whether a person is motivated to try newer things out, wouldn't hobbies be a good indicator?
I mean, again, to be very frank, and my personal opinion, I mean, when we were starting out, when we were kind of trying to get, let's say, when we were, okay, I'm still trying to get a job all the time. I think when we were applying, we were always asked to put like hobbies, what are your side kind of, let's say, activities, what you have done. But I think grow, let's say, if I take the situation now, especially in this hyper competitive, environment of, let's say, AI, cloud, IT, things like that, I have honestly seen colleagues and myself included, maybe, we put very less focus on it these days. It's almost guaranteed. I mean, I think the assumption is that, yes, you will have a hobby. And, again, it's like, it's very difficult to judge how much of the hobby actually helps you. Yes, you can be a photographer, which kind of makes you a bit creative, but then everybody is clicking pictures with iPhones here. So, I mean, again, I think if you really want to get a job in this field, I think it has gone down. That's my honest opinion, and kind of the value of hobbies, or let's say how it is considered in today's job market. But again, I'm talking about, let's say, AI, IT, these kind of things. Yeah, I don't know, maybe in marketing, maybe in other types of jobs, they are still very valuable. So I can only say from my own experience what I see, and unfortunately, I do practice sometimes. So.
Okay, last question regarding the motivation part, because I'm still hung up there. What if someone recommends a person? Would you take that into consideration? And in the recommendation, it's written that he's very motivated to learn newer things. Would you take that recommendation letter into consideration?
Sure, it depends. I mean, so I think what happens usually is you get a more, let's say, because companies have to give you a letter of recommendation, you get a very generic recommendation, which I wouldn't take too seriously. But yes, if your manager or someone even your colleague, who kind of writes a personal recommendation for you, I would take that very much into consideration. I think that has a lot of value. If someone in today's world takes time to write a recommendation for you, I think it has a lot of value. And yes, again, that person's perspective might be different. It might be in a different context and things like that. But I would, at least, again, speaking from my own experience, I think that still holds a lot of value.
Okay. Let's take a step back. You mentioned that there is a gap and we should bridge the gap. What would you do in your own capacity to bridge this gap between the academic world and the industry?
I think the best strategy is, to really let the work speak for itself. I think the more we see, let's say, more we see successful examples of where something that is more in the, research field, let's say, really where, where you're able to take something that has come out in a recent AI conference or something, and you're able to apply that to solve something in a very enterprise world where, you have a concrete problem and you need to solve it today. I think the more and more we see examples of this where people see that this really works, everything is, driven by, let's say, a need. So once people see that there is, the enterprise world sees that there is something in research that can be leveraged today. Similarly, the academic researchers see that, we cannot think of abstract problems and try solving it. We need to think of something that can be used by the industry today. The more we have such applications, you can already see it. I mean, in most, let's say, good AI conferences these days, they ask for code, they ask for reproducibility, they ask for, that it solves things, it addresses ethical concerns and things like that. So there is a certain, let's say, amount of bridging that is happening. But again, like I said before, it's not sufficient as of today. You hardly see any companies kind of represented at research conferences. Similarly, the company, the managers, the decision makers are not going to these conferences because they don't see the value of it. Similarly, researchers are, let's say, the more academic settings, they are very happy to keep working in their academic world, and they do not see the need to apply things to let's say, more real world kind of settings. Most of the things they imagine in their prototypes and things like that are basically imagined. They are not real. But again, I think this is changing to some extent. You have real world data sets, but again, if you look at NLP, you have the benchmarks that you look at. You have now the squad and the other benchmarks. There are 8 benchmarks for 8 different tasks, what are usually considered as the key NLP tasks. So you have from translation to summary abstraction to chatbots, so the conversations and things like that. These, they don't come, they are very limited kind of benchmarks, and these data sets have been designed kind of few years back, so they're really not up to date. And it's very difficult to say that these represent the NLP problems that we have today. But again, maybe the blame is on the enterprise companies, because they don't get into this conversation of providing, this is the data we have, this is the problem we have, that can you solve this? So yes, there are exceptions, but in most cases, this is not happening. So unfortunately, the gap still exists. And the only way to close this gap is trying to do more successful technology transfers. Only when we see, let's say, more of these kind of research results being applied today, I think this will hopefully the gap will kind of shorten. But I think sorry to drag the question. I think what is happening is that the enterprise vendors are also starting to kind of maybe bridge this gap, because you have the Amazons, you have the Googles now kind of trying to come up with products which are really taking these research products and putting them into something that can be applied to let's say an enterprise context. So this is where you have the cloud capabilities coming up. You have the ready-to-use APIs, which maybe are not so customizable, but they take the approach of, this is the minimum that you can use as a starting point. This is used as an API. So I see them kind of, so cloud again. So, the NLP API is kind of trying to bridge this gap a bit between the really enterprises and the research world. But I think till the kind of practitioners and the researchers start talking to each other, this will still take some time.
You mentioned that as a part of the company, when you carried your research forward, you thought of what would happen in 2 to 3 years ahead in time, right? So a very natural question would be, where do you see technology in these domains of NLP, computer vision, predictive analysis evolve in the future, 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, 5 to 10 years, I don't think anyone will be kind of, earlier we used to, even in research, when I was in a more R&D setting, we used to do 5-year kind of, we used to say that we work on things that can be applied in 5 years. In an enterprise setting, it's ideally what can be done yesterday, but for the sake of it, we still say, let's build a roadmap for something that can be implemented in 2 years, but then the roadmap changes the next year, So I think in this very evolving landscape, it's very difficult to do these roadmaps. But if I have to, pick a technology, or let's say if I have to bet on something that I think would be relevant for these 3 fields, so predictive. So let's start with, again, if I try to really abstract high level, what I see as AI in companies today, I would say there are 3 or 4 broad categories. So one, predictive analytics, which is more the forecasting, the customer churn, the predictions and things like that. The other one are more NLP focused applications. The third one, computer vision. And the fourth, I would say there's a lot of momentum these days, again, maybe most of it for public relations purposes around ethical AI, explainable AI, and things like that. So I will come to, let's say, try to address my views on all 4. So predictive analytics, I see the next big thing really kind of which might have an impact is AutoML. So right now you use a lot of, even as data scientists, we use a lot of, we start from scratch. We use our intuition, we use our experience to try to think of which algorithm makes sense for a particular problem. With AutoML, with neural architecture search and things like that, these will get more and more mature, more and more, let's say, powerful, I would say. And this, I do not see them kind of as replacing a data scientist, but I do see them as kind of doing the first step of data exploration that we all usually do. So they will give you kind of hints in terms of these are the 5 algorithms which make sense for this type of data. This is like how the data is structured and things like that. So AutoML will rise. This will also mean that it will lower the amount of specialization that you need. for a lot of jobs. So again, something to think about how it will impact the job dynamics and things like that. If I think of NLP, again, after transformers, honestly, I don't see, what can impact. What I see is really kind of, yes, there would be more applications and, synthetic, let's say, in terms of, some applications where you're able to use the GPT-3 transformers and huge data, let's say, models to kind of write news stories and things like that. They have very little, enterprise usage as of today. Yes, they sound interesting. Every now and then you get a news article where, it is written by a GPT-3 based decoder or something like that, which is great, but it doesn't have much enterprise value. I think the enterprise value of it only comes when it can write the next chatbot answer and things like that. So today, chatbot answers are, you provide predefined chatbot answers. Tomorrow, if you can use a transformer to really to first of all understand what it means and write a new answer which isn't predefined, I see a certain momentum going towards there, but I think we are still a bit far from there, because I see, even I was kind of reviewing papers for EMNLP recently, and even the latest, let's say, research papers are a bit behind that. But I see that kind of, if you ask me what I see as the next priority in NLP for the next 2 years, I would say more natural conversations. I think that's where we are headed. Computer vision. This computer vision led to the whole, let's say, explosion of AI, kind of promise of AI with deep learning and things like that. But that was a few years back. I think what I see mostly happening in the field today, as I mentioned, is people are trying different approaches like vision transformers and things like that, which is basically taking transformers and applying it to a computer vision. Just to give a very high level idea, it doesn't necessarily mean that vision transformers, yes, there's a lot of research interest behind it because they need to do some new things, researchers, but the vision transformers don't give you better accuracy than, let's say, the convolutional neural network, which has existed for many years. What vision transformers, where they show value, is that they are able to work with less data. So you need less training data. This is where they show value. But as an enterprise, if your goal is more to get, how you can do object detection or semantic segmentation, a convolutional neural network that was discovered many years back will work perfectly and even provide better accuracy than the vision transformers that you get today. Only if you have less data, only if you don't have sufficient data, your problem is very different from where you get pre-trained models. These can help. And the other part where I see a bit of momentum maybe in the near future, and where we are also working as Darwin, is really to push this computer vision models to the edge, to get them to it, because right now everything is supervised, everything happens on the cloud. The idea with the edge is to really push this trained computer vision models, very large models, to be executed on small IoT devices, small cameras. A mobile phone is already a very powerful computer, so I wouldn't even consider mobile as really pushing the boundaries of edge. With edge, I really mean the small sensors. So NVIDIA is kind of quite, let's say, leaders in this field, where they're pushing, let's say, the hardwares, the GPU-specific hardwares, which, the Jetson Nano and things like that, where you can deploy very advanced computer vision models on small devices. And these are good, because then you can put them in hospitals, you can put them in shops. They are not sending data back to the cloud, but they can do things in a very privacy-preserving way. So this is where I see kind of on the deployment side, really things picking up on the computer vision side. And lastly, ethical AI, explainable AI. I think there's a certain amount of this is, those things that big companies do to sound good. I don't think people still take them seriously. It's just that they seem good from public relations point of view. So companies are having this ethical AIs, but I don't think, I see a bit of momentum behind it, but I still don't see people taking it seriously. It's just, so, and it's also very difficult to do. Explainable AI for statistical based models, you can do it. But let's say it's already difficult to do for neural networks. Forget the transformers, where you have an architecture which is kind of stacking of different neural network architectures. You can forget about it for now. And especially if we think about this, composable AI, or let's say multimodal AI, where you are combining an NLP model with a computer vision model, so you can understand the complexity of it. So I think we are far from it, but maybe the good thing is that you do not see too many examples of these in enterprise today. So most of the enterprise applications that you see today are probably as good as a regression model. So you can do a bit of explanation and things like that on top of it. So in a way, it's good or bad, but yes, there's a lot of momentum behind it. And I think this would also pick up in the near future, but I see it more or less like privacy, so we all know we should be concerned about privacy. Every now and then we hear a news article, this company takes our data, that company takes our data, but honestly, we don't care so much. It's the same with ethical AI, it's good to have, but in the end of the day, do most people really care about it for it to be considered a priority? So unless people show that they care about it, companies won't take it seriously. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I hope it covered kind of all four categories that I more or less.
And I have a lot of follow-up questions, which I'm not very sure if I can ask because of the time constraint. Darwin Edge works on computer vision, predictive analysis, federated learning, deep learning, and edge inference. So keeping these domains and defining these domains as AI and leaving NLP out, what are the biggest challenges in these fields standing today?
I think the challenge, as I was kind of briefly hinting at, the challenge is really to take, most of the work that has been done, because on the cloud, we are going in the other direction, I would say, where we are almost thinking it's like unlimited resources in terms of both computing power and memory. So we are thinking of, the serverless architectures and things like that, where you're starting to build, let's say, applications in a way where you don't worry about computing and you don't worry about any of these constraints that we have grown up with, beware of memory, it will run out and things like that. Okay, it still costs us money, but I think with the edge, we are really trying to go the other way around, where you again start to worry about these things. There are certain benefits because these are, let's say, devices which need to run autonomously, so they have we need to be careful of their power consumption, so because they can last only a few hours, and otherwise, so how much you let's say how much computation you can do, and how fast, things like that. So I think that adds a lot of complexity to what we are used to, the computer vision models kind of executing in the cloud. But it has a lot of promise as well. I mean, to be able to do it properly in a very efficient architecture. And also, in terms of, let's say, in neural networks, and if you really go to the bit level kind of details, where we are using, let's say, float 16 kind of variables to do the internal maths and things like that, you need to maybe update them. You can only use integers and things like that, which brings down the size of the trained neural network and things like that. So you need to optimize at that level. Of course, there's a level below as well, where companies like Intel and NVIDIA are optimizing how you can, let's say, do the hardware architecture change from a von Neumann kind of sequential architecture to more neuromorphic and things like that, which are more biologically inspired, which are good for massively parallel kind of things. But we are not at the hardware level, where we focus more or try to address the challenges is, let's say, how can we optimize the neural network architecture, reduce the memory footprint, while still keeping the same level of accuracy. I think it's kind of a balance, and that's where all these things make sense. So federated learning, again, is trying to address the limitations of the centralized supervised learning, where you have all the data, all the computational power in one place. So with the edge, let's say, you will be collecting, especially in a factory setting or things like that, or even in hospitals, you will be collecting data at the edge, which may belong to different organizations, and then You're trying to combine them with federated learning to still be able to build a model on all of them belonging to different organizations. But comparing it to a centralized model, if you have 10 data items, you try to divide it into two companies, 5, and then you build two models on, two, let's say five data items, and then you build another layer to kind of combine these two models into, let's say, a centralized model without any of them knowing the other's data. So that's kind of a privacy preserving data which tries to address the limitations that you do not have. One organization may not have a lot of data, so you're able to combine data, but still keeping their privacy, let's say, aspects. So these things, again, because the current supervised models need so much data, they are data hungry. So all these approaches are kind of starting to pick up to address that need. So there are a lot of things happening. I can keep talking about it for many hours.
And that is perfectly all right, because I like listening to you. But yeah, we are towards the end of the time limit that we have, and I'll ask a personal question now. It is more towards the end of this discussion, and I believe I can ask this personal question. You have lived and worked in 5 countries. How different do you think are the cultures? Especially if you have to compare the subcontinent, Canada, and the countries in Europe where you have lived and worked. Because you have been in France, you did your Ph.D., you worked briefly in Germany, and you have spent a substantial amount of your life in Switzerland.
It's difficult to compare, it's I will give a diplomatic answer. I think they all have their pros and cons. It goes back a bit to, where you feel comfortable, where you feel, of course, India is different because, there's the family ties, and of course, that's where you have grown up. So that's different from, let's say, Canada and Europe. And Europe, again, each country is very different, it's like the States in India, so as you would have imagined yourself. So it's difficult to compare them. It's, having grown up on Bollywood movies and things like that, Switzerland had a certain appeal from the start. So I think that's why I at least wanted to have a feel of Switzerland, same for Paris and France and things like that. But I think it's good to try, but I wouldn't say, again, everyone has the luxury of trying all of them. I think once you find somewhere where you feel comfortable, you have a job so I think it's good to, be satisfied both on the job and the personal front. So one, yes, you may not find all the jobs, or basically all the types of jobs that you're looking for everywhere. Maybe that will change post-COVID. We will need to see, as, more and more companies are saying we will hire anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter where you are. So I think that's one big shift we will need to see and analyze how it really plays out. I think for now, it's difficult to assess its impact, how it will go forward. But if that really happens, that will really change the global dynamics of people, traveling to different countries to work. So that is one big, let's say, disruption that I see coming. But again, how successful and to what extent that will happen needs to be seen. But other than that, I would really say, I think wherever you feel comfortable, explore the world as much as you can. It's like, still, maybe I should have traveled to South America as well before, I can make a proper comparison. So I think that's something but I think if you get the summary, it really depends where you feel comfortable.
Yeah, but what tips would you give to a young professional who are entering extremely diverse and multicultural teams? Because a lot of students who come for their masters come out of their home country for the first time, and they often stick to people who are from very similar cultural backgrounds. So a few of them have inhibitions and apprehensions about joining big teams with multiple people from across the cultural spectrum. What would be your 2 tips? And I promise this is the last question.
Actually, I would see it kind of the other way around, So, let's say, let's say I went to Canada for my studies after, let's say, it was my first foreign country. And I think, again, if I reflect a bit, I would have found it difficult to coming directly from India to work in a company where there were only Canadians, or let's say, only people of a certain category. Let's say of a certain nationality, because they have a very different culture, both at work and on the personal side. But actually, if because most companies, at least the global ones, you see a diverse mix, and that should actually be a comforting factor. So I think it's wrong to think that, I would see that, if a company where multiple, let's say, nationalities can work together or are working together already, that means that the company is open to, or at least has built a culture of openness around it to, to really encourage people coming from a certain, let's say, region who haven't been exposed to this type of multicultural organization to work. So I would see that really as a positive thing. So if you haven't been exposed to this environment, I would really, encourage, let's say, students to, I would see that as a really positive sign that you are kind of trying to join a multinational company or things like that. So I see them more as a safe ground. But on the other hand, yes, you cannot be in your, the reason. So if you are so kind of afraid, so it's probably better to find a job in the environment you are used to. The reason you have decided to come to a different country is that I'm assuming that you want to try certain new things, meet new people and things like that. And the best way to meet them is actually at work, because there you have a certain, let's say, common ground in terms of you're taking the same course, you're working in the same team. So you have certain, talking points already, which kind of should make you comfortable in getting around. And then, of course, once you do that, that will automatically lead to broadening your social circle in terms of you will meet the friends of friends and things like that. So again, it depends. I'm not a really personality expert, and if you're so afraid, maybe it's better to stay in India. Yeah, but if you have already taken the step of coming out, I would really start with your work colleagues, whether at university or at work, and then from there try to kind of integrate as much as possible. Of course, you don't need to. Usually, in most countries these days, you have a bit of, let's say, Indian community and things like that who can provide you the initial support and, let's say, that you might need. But after that, it's up to you how much you want to, integrate in the local customs, the local culture.
Debmalya, it is always a pleasure conversing with you, and this has been no different. For those who are listening to this conversation, Darwin Digital's website is darwinedge.com, and on their page, they list what they work on. They work on computer vision, predictive analysis, edge inference, deep learning, federated learning, and reinforcement learning. Except for the term edge inference, I believe the other terms are already very popular among students, not only at this university, but across all German universities. And if there are students from other universities in Europe, thank you. And I'm sure you have heard of these. And maybe check their website out. And if you like reading, then maybe follow Dr. Debmalya Biswas on Medium, and his URL is debmalyabiswas.medium.com. It's incredible having a conversation with you.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure, and I hope I could give you some, at least my, what I feel, or have an overview of things. And feel free to get in touch. I'm always open to conversations, interesting conversations, and connecting with students is something. I think we have a luxury that we are based at University Innovation Park, so I think we do try to keep, let's say, this as much as possible, whether in terms of internships, thesis, and things like that. And I promise you, usually our thesis is where you will have a proper need, and it's not like a side project. So yeah, feel free to touch. It would be good to hear, and thanks again. Yeah, have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I'll extend it a bit. There is a question that came, and I forgot to take audience question. I'm sorry. There is a question, and the question is by Shubham. Shubham is a team member, and he has an interest in NLP, and now he's trying to specialize in computer vision. His question is, since you are a Ph.D, what suggestions would you like to give to people who have doubts in their mind whether their knowledge would be industry relevant keeping in mind the hard work they all put in?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So is the question that...
Basically, he is in a doubt whether he should do PhD or not. And on which parameters would he decide? Because PhD work might not be industry relevant, and they are putting in so much hard work in their PhD work. So should he do or not do the PhD?
Okay, I sort of understand, and I will try to, let's say, answer based on that. So, okay, so let's say you're doing a PhD in NLP and things like that. So I think, again, it depends what you want to do. So if you're doing a PhD in NLP, you will have a, let's say, I think your ideal, let's say, career opportunities would be either you go to a university, become a professor, or you join one of these industry research labs, whether it's, Google Research, Microsoft Research, IBM Research, or a few of them which are left. So this would be kind of the more natural paths. On the other hand, I would still say that if you want to target, or your interests are more in the applied companies who are not kind of, doing research either in academic or industry setting, but after PhD, you want to really apply your skills to join, let's say, a bit more engineering or even the non-IT companies. The good thing is that in machine learning these days, today, having a PhD is seen as an advantage. Maybe salary-wise, you wouldn't get that much above what you would usually get with a master's and maybe 3 to 4 years experience. So I don't think you would get an advantage from that point of view. But usually it's considered a plus these days to have because maybe you're not able to apply the exact problem that you were working on, but people still value the PhD, because people, at least in the industry, people have an impression, I don't know, good or bad, that PhD means that at least you are able to stay focused, you are able to work on a problem, you are able to, let's say, build something new or think of something new that no one has thought before. So both from a novelty, innovation point of view. So all these things are kind of, good, especially in machine learning these days or data science. So that's why you will see many job advertisements which say PhD preferred and things like that. So maybe you won't be able to use the next generation of transformers that you built in a company, but I think you will get the value for your PhD, in terms of you wouldn't be behind, let's say, the salary you would get, or the compensation, or the level at which you join, even if you join this non-research organizations. What I mean, I think this is the best advice that I can give you. But beware of it, that these are all the things that you can do after the PhD. PhD itself is not very easy. It depends on, you finding a good supervisor, you finding a problem that you are interested to work on for 3 to 4 years. So all the advice that I gave you is basically on how it would look like after you have finished your PhD, but don't underestimate the effort of getting a PhD itself. Yeah, so
the companies might also think that if this guy has survived a PhD, he will definitely survive my company.
Well, I mean, again, to be very frank, there might be some challenges as well. Yeah, like I said, usually in machine learning, data science these days, it's considered a plus. But, again, to be very frank, given that your manager might not have a PhD in most cases, it might be seen that you are overqualified as well. Yeah? We are humans, so all these things play out, so just be ready for it. Maybe some companies or specific teams that they are hiring, they are not ready to have a PhD because they never had a PhD in their team. Some of them still think that you will go about publishing papers and not worry about the problems that the company has. So you will find a mixed reaction. In general, it's positively perceived these days, especially if you do it in machine learning, NLP. In these fields, PhD is preferred, because I think people understand that it requires a certain rigor and kind of mathematical understanding and things like that. But not guaranteed, it will not work every time. Yes.
Debmalya, thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for this conversation.
It was a pleasure, and feel free to connect, and looking forward to hearing all your next exploits and the next round of research, research results. Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, you have made it till the end of this another amazing conversation. Please check this space out next week, Wednesday. Next week, we publish another episode which you might find useful as well. We aim to release one new episode every Wednesday for the next 6 weeks on LinkedIn, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, Stitcher, GeoSavan, and a few more platforms. If you find this conversation useful, please share this with your friends and stay connected with us. Thank you for listening.